Welcome back. It was the big story in the November 4th off-year election results. The Latino counties in places like New Jersey and Virginia that went for Donald Trump flipped back to Democrats and the gubernatorial candidates in that state, which kind of was predicted by Michael Madrid, a political consultant who has worked for candidates of both parties, is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project, a native Southern Californian, and the author of The Latino Century, How America's Largest Minority is Transforming Democracy. Michael, thank you for taking the time. So, the question was, in 2024, when Donald Trump did extremely well, did Republicans buy the Latino vote or did they rent them? And clearly, based on what we saw earlier this month, it was the latter.
Yeah, well, the reality is we're getting more and more understanding of the vote, Latino vote, as it unfolds, is both parties are renting them. The reason why I say that is because, yes, there was a dramatic return of Latinos away from the Republican Party. Notice I'm saying away from the Republican Party. It doesn't necessarily mean going to the Democratic Party because they're in love with them. That's the exact same dynamic that happened 10 months ago, in the last November, or 12 months ago. And Democrats are losing Latino voters. Republicans are losing Latino voters. This is the largest ethnic group in California. It is the swingiest vote because it doesn't have a partisan anchor, and neither side is listening to the economic concerns. And so they're roundly rejecting whichever side happens to be in power and is not addressing those concerns.
So Texas Republicans redrew the congressional districts in that state because they thought border counties that went for Donald Trump would go for the Republican in that district. It's now being challenged in court. They've been invalidated by a federal judge. But assuming that stayed by the Supreme Court, that could have been that is a risky bet because those districts that they've redrawn ostensibly to help Republicans could still flip to the Democrats.
I think you're being very generous by saying they're too optimistic. I think it was built on faulty assumptions and believing their own press clippings. Look, the Latino vote has been moving away from the Democratic Party for the better part of a decade. It's just gotten really pronounced and was most pronounced historic in November of 2024. But as I was saying, the correct way to understand this is a movement away from the Democratic Party. That doesn't mean that they are in love with or even like much the Republican Party. They were willing to give the Republicans a chance on the economy because they didn't feel that they were going to get anything different under the Biden-Harris administration. That's a perfectly reasonable conclusion to make. But Trump, within weeks, literally, you started to see Latino voter support collapse on what he called Liberation Day, which was when he announced the tariffs against Mexico and Canada, just weeks into his administration. This was fully 6-7 weeks before the ICE crackdowns, the ICE raids in Los Angeles. So this was happening before all of this nonsense on our streets, before terrorizing our community. And it's really important to understand because in every exit poll nationwide, whether you're Dominican Republic, or whether you're from Puerto Rico, Mexican, Cuban, all of these groups have responded to the economy overwhelmingly. And the ICE raids supplemented that belief. It reaffirmed their commitment that this was a bad decision in November. So all of these voters have come back, at least temporarily. The Democrats have now another opportunity, a second chance, to start talking about economic pocketbook issues and get back to being a working class party. If they're able to do that, yes, you could see Latinos come back to a more historic traditional range. But you could also see Republicans correct it. That's not likely because I think the economy is getting worse. Latino voters blame Trump now. They're going to only blame him more heading into the midterms. But neither party has a hold on either of any of these voters, or the loyalty, the partisan loyalty amongst Latinos is absolutely the weakest because neither party is talking about what's concerning them.
Let's talk about immigration. Latinos, based on the 2024 vote, again in border counties along Texas particularly, clearly wanted a tighter border. It was out of control. They were experiencing it. But there's evidence they didn't bargain for the internal enforcement, interior enforcement that we've been seeing. They didn't want their uncle harassed at Home Depot.
That's precisely right, Conan, and I think that's well stated. And look, I don't want to suggest that the overreach of the federal government of Donald Trump's, terrorizing Latino communities isn't having an impact. It certainly is. It's not as big as the economy. It's really not even that close, but it is absolutely having an impact. The irony of the situation is Latinos are simply saying, yeah, we want strict border enforcement. We want a legal pathway to citizenship. Let's just get our borders under control. But they're swinging between these two parties. Biden, who essentially allowed for what was we now have to acknowledge was essentially an open borders policy. I mean, it was a dramatically broad allowance of people in here to claim refugee status that really upset a lot of people suffering economically. And then to go to this extreme of militarizing our streets and tearing children from their mother's arms. Why is it shocking to anybody that Latinos are fleeing from both parties when these are the choices that they're given? We're not open borders, but we're not pro militarization and raiding churches and hospitals and homes either. That seems to be a reasonable middle, and neither party is capable of developing that sort of a policy.
So has Donald Trump fallen in love with foreign policy? I mean, Venezuela, Ukraine, Gaza, his emphasis on winning a Nobel Peace Prize. And of course, it's actually easier in foreign policy to succeed and leave a legacy, but it doesn't help bring down the price of groceries.
Again, this is completely self-inflicted. This is completely ignoring the issues and concerns of a struggling middle class. The Republicans, if they're going to have a chance in the midterms, and it doesn't look like they're going to have much of one, they're going to have to get back to talking about bread and butter, pocketbook issues. The only question in my mind is, will Democrats return the favor and make the same mistake that they did just a year ago by ignoring the economy and talking to the excessive cultural issues that have so defined their brand and brought it to historic lows?
Michael Madrid is a political consultant, the co-founder of the Lincoln Project, author of The Latino Century. Michael, thanks for taking the time.
Conan, always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.